for it to catch up. And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome along once again to How to Stay Sane in a Pandemic webcast with me, Barbara Scully. This is the first edition for this year, for 2021. This was a series I started in November of last year. So it's probably too late to wish everybody a happy new year, but hopefully 2021 will be a somewhat better year than 2020 was, which was a bit of a shit show. As you know, we're broadcasting live right now on Twitter, on Periscope, on Facebook, and on YouTube. So to those of you who are joining, I can see you all logging in and joining us. You're very welcome. Come in, pull up a comfy chair for yourself, and I hope you have a drink to join us for about the next 30 minutes or so, which is guaranteed to have plenty of crack, possibly one or two controversial opinions and some good recommendations to help you get through. If you're watching this back at a later stage, because I know a lot of you do that as well, you are equally welcome along. And I would ask you that if you enjoy this webcast, please share it. The links will be available afterwards, and please share it along. That would be doing me a really good favor. If you want to look back on any of the previous episodes, they're all available now on my website, which is barbarascully.com. So my guest, and you can see her here sitting beside me this week. My guest is a woman of whom I am very fond and for whom I have great time. Although politically we probably would be not completely at opposite ends of the spectrum, but we would regularly cross swords, shall we say, and we would regularly disagree. But she is somebody who thinks a lot, she questions a lot, and she is an all-around kind of impressive woman. Columnist and broadcaster Sarah Carey, thank you so much, particularly today, for dragging yourself away and joining us here on the webcast. How are you?
Well, thank you for having me, Barbara. And I've got CNN open in another window, so we can keep a roving eye on things. And I noticed that Laura Bush's mask matched her coat, which I thought was a very nice touch. So I like watching those little things, you know. And of course, we were supposed to meet up before Christmas. On the 19th, was it? But we were very good. And we listened to Tony, and Tony said, now reduce your contacts and rethink Christmas. So we were very obedient. We did what Tony said, but this means we're finally having some kind of a catch up, even if it wasn't.
I know this is true. This is true. Although do remember, it's not just the two of us.
Okay, I'll behave.
Listen, talking of having CNN on there in another window and the day that's in it, it's an auspicious day, I guess. Are you kind of, I'm kind of tempering my hopefulness with kind of various other things, but tell me how you feel about today and what's happening in Washington.
Relief. It's just overwhelming relief. It's over. Because I remember the horror when Trump was elected, and it's over. Now, I know Trumpism can survive Trump. I know he's not officially going away, but decency is about to be restored. And I have a friend who lives in California who warned me. He said, look, people expect too much of presidents. It's more like the European Union. The states have an awful lot of power. What presidents can do is limited. But decency and manners and hope is back, and he sets the tone. Remember that famous line from the first episode of ER where Morgenstern says to the leading doctor, you set the tone. So Biden is going to set the tone, and the tone is what needs resetting. So that's what I feel today.
He's a tough job ahead of him though, right?
He does, but he's got a lot of goodwill. And, there's always this thing, I remember about Nader Marxism, where in revolutionary speak, the worse things are, the better. In a way, while what happened at the Capitol last week was the nadir of Trumpism and how bad things got, it finally showed people like Mike Pence, who refused to go to Trump's send-off this morning and who was at the inauguration today. It was a final line for an awful lot of people. Mitch McConnell is possibly one of the most evil people in America. While Trump was doing his circus and his shites over the White House, McConnell was appointing his conservative judges to all the federal appeals court. But even he's saying no. So that was the moment, and that was the line that a lot of people weren't able to cross. So it had some good in the end, despite the horrific nature of what actually happened.
Yeah, good. We'll be off in time anyway to watch the actual main event. What are you drinking, by the way, before we get down to business?
So you asked, you said, now, Sarah, what are you going to be drinking? And I really overthought it because it's
not like you at all.
And I'm actually not able to drink that much anymore. And
No.
had a bad experience, bad night out there early in December where there were cocktails and terrible things happened. So I've gone for a very middle class prim Baileys in
That's
a
quite a
very
healthy
prim.
size looking Baileys now. That's a healthy looking
Yeah.
Baileys.
And also the glass is a glass that my dad gave me. It's a Waterford Crystal sherry glass. And so it's much, much nicer when you drink it out of a posh glass. So that's what I'm
Yes.
doing. So cheers, Barbs.
Brought you on.
Inauguration
Brought
day.
you on. I'm joining you in
Yeah.
a gin and tonic
Mm.
to celebrate, as you say, a new hopeful era. Okay, so can I ask you again, just before we get into the books,
Mm.
how are you finding this, whatever it is now, the third lockdown? I mean, we're at the darkest time of the year, in the longest month of the year, which always seems like a very
Mhm.
long month anyway. How are you coping?
So some days not great. This is
Mm,
definitely much harder than the last one. I think the loneliness is cumulative. So, remember last spring, the sun was shining. There was almost a sense of liberation in ways,
yeah,
liberation from the office and all of that. And so I live down this remote cul-de-sac in County Meath. All my friends live in Dublin. We're in a great fun WhatsApp group, but they can meet up with each other and go for runs and have a takeout coffee or something like that. And so it's just really built up. So there have now been mornings, since January, I think, oh, I can't do this and I just want to get up. And then that vacuum in your head from lack of stimulation, all the little
yeah,
dark thoughts start to creep in. So you were talking about, so the title of this is How to Stay Sane. I did go insane once, like literally. And it's a constant struggle at the best of times just to, not be too self-destructive. So you do have to work at it. And I
yeah.
am very alert to those days when I can feel it pulling me under. And I have to put all my tactics into operation and say, no, not going there, not happening. Here's what I need to do to fight this. So it's actually a very
Mm.
relevant title for me.
Yeah.
And
No, I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think that it just seems at this stage relentless. It just seems like, God, where is it going to end? But anyway, so as you say, having strategies that you can use yourself for staying sane are really, I have found to be really important. And one of the ones that I find most useful is reading, because I'm a great believer in the fact that reading a book takes all your concentration. So it takes you completely out of whatever you're doing and transports you away to wherever the book is taking you. So I can see behind you've got your intellectual background. I know that's not real. I know that's just something you took from
oh,
the
it's one of
internet.
the shower curtains. You get a
So
shower
what are you
curtain.
reading? What are you recommending to us to read, or what are you reading at the moment? Talk to me about
Okay.
books.
So I have loads piled up now because I've no discipline. So when you asked me to produce what I was reading, I was going, oh, that, and this one is good, and that one is good. So I've got my honors list and my pass list, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to start with a kind of a theme of books. This is East West Street by Philippe Sands. Now, this is about a couple of things. His family and the families of two lawyers who came from a particular town in Poland. And of course, all their families were killed during the Holocaust. Now, I did a history degree in Trinity, and I have always avoided World War II. I have always avoided concentration camp material. It just gives me the creeps, what man's inhumanity to man and all of that. But I was privileged enough to attend a lecture in Trinity that Philippe Sands actually gave. He's a gentleman, Anglo-French human rights lawyer. And this is, and it will sound bizarre, a legal thriller. And it's about the two lawyers who during the Nuremberg trials, who, as I say, were originally from this town in Poland. One escaped to England, the other to America. And it's where they developed the crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity. And a companion book to that is Amin Maalouf, and this is In the Name of Identity, Violence and the Need to Belong. And I think it's so relevant for today. And so Sands argues that genocide, in a way, is not a useful crime to prosecute people for, because after the war and after the tribe or the people, have been annihilated, it makes healing very hard because it's all about your identity and who you are. And crimes against humanity is against the individual. And it just seems to me that so much of the strife that we're experiencing, and in America that we're watching, hopefully the beginning of the healing today, is all centered on this total failure that we have to stop hating somebody else because of the way they look, because they talk a bit funny, because they wear their hair differently, because they believe in something else. And it thrilled me and grabbed me in a way that I didn't expect it to. So I really, really recommend that. And then on a similar vein, I am actually rereading this at the moment. It's my second time this year I have read this, and now can I get this in front of the camera? So that's Tom Holland's Dominion. Okay. And the making of the Western world. And Tom's on Twitter. He's well worth following. And he argues that Christianity is the waters in which we swim. That the main beliefs of Christianity have so infused the Western mind that we don't even notice them and recognize them anymore. So the UN Declaration of Human Rights is a Christian document. And we just decoupled ourselves from the theology, but the basic Christian message of love, that all people are equal. And St. Paul was the great original thinker on this. There is no Jew, there is no Gentile. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God. And that was a really revolutionary thought. And now it's become so commonplace that liberal atheists who would think that they have nothing to do with the church despise the institutional church for everything that it did to people. And yet this is where it all came from. And his other main argument is that the church has constantly been a source of revolution and reformation. So it's always gone through this cycle where you have people who have revolutionary ideas and moral progress, and then they become top dog. They start oppressing everybody else and turning it into a really convoluted, evil version of what they first thought. And then there's another process of reformation. So I think if you're someone, like I say, who does believe in civil rights and social democracy and in liberalism, you actually need to read this book to see where you came from. And
but I mean, I would have an issue. And again, I'm no historian. I didn't ever do a degree in anything. But are you saying that he's saying that it was the Christian church, which is only with those what I would call just common decency of love and respect and that for each other, that was an invention of the church, that nobody that people or humans weren't aware of that before the Christian church? Because I would say that paganism, which predates obviously the Christian church by a long way, and the respect that paganism, and especially here in Ireland, Celtic paganism and Celtic, then what became a Celtic Christianity, but Celtic spirituality was all about seeing the divine in everything, in other people, as well as in the natural world and in the rivers and the mountains and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure that
well, say another angle that he comes from it, which is similar, is that what Jesus's death did, which was the death of the slave, the worst possible death that was inflicted on the lowest of the low, the crucifixion, showed that God was identifying with the weak. And it was the weak who were divine and the poor who were divine. And that was absolutely revolutionary, because remember, this is in the time of Rome and Greece, when emperors could be gods and the rich were valued and the poor were nothing. And that was the breakthrough revolution.
But you see, I kind of agree with all of that, because I do agree that Jesus was a bit of a hippie and he was all about peace and love, and he was quite a turning over all the, the establishment and all that kind of stuff. But I can't make that jump between that and the Catholic Church, which has always kind of gathered all this wealth, is all about a hierarchical system. It's totally not about equality from a structural perspective.
Yeah, and that is precisely, again, the point where he keeps tracing these cycles that the institutional church has gone through, where, the institution becomes corrupt in itself. And that the Reformation that we talk about with Martin Luther King, well, that was just one Reformation, and there's a lot more. So he does, for example, a great chapter on the civil rights movement in the 1960s in America, and Martin Luther King, because of course Martin Luther King was a Baptist preacher. He's Dr. Martin Luther King, and his everything that he believed in and campaigned for, he did from a religious perspective. And he used the Bible and he used the teachings of St. Paul in his arguments, and that was part as well of his approach to forgiving. that what God did was forgive. What Nelson Mandela did, the great act of forgiveness, was what actually brought peace to South Africa. And may I read a little bit, just a bit about Martin Luther King?
Sure.
So he says, the campaign for civil rights gave to Christianity an overt centrality in American politics that it had not had since the decades before the Civil War. King, by stirring the slumbering conscience of white Christians, succeeded in setting his country on a transformative new path. To talk of love, as Paul had talked of it, as a thing greater than prophecy or knowledge or faith, had once again become a revolutionary act. This was the same vision of progress that in the 18th century had inspired Quakers and evangelicals to campaign for the abolition of slavery. That's where the abolition of slavery came from, the Quakers and evangelicals in England and the US. But now in the 1960s, the spark that had set it to flame with a renewed brilliance was the faith of African Americans. The sound of protest was the sound of the Black churches. Now, obviously, he goes into it in a lot more detail, but you see, you forget that. And then he goes on how then people were listening to the arguments of the civil rights movement, and they went, well, hang on a second, that applies to Black America, but it also applies to women. It also applies to homosexuals. You know, I know my husband is from Belfast, he's a Catholic, and they were sitting there going, but this applies to us as well because of the discrimination they were giving. And then that was the big challenge for the church, because while they were happy to put their weight behind what King was saying and Black civil rights, would they also do so for women and homosexuals when this other part of their literal faith, and that was the challenge and the difficulty for them, and how then some people couldn't cope with that and broke away, and other people stayed in the church to fight for women's rights and for gay rights. So it's just,
see, I knew having you as a guest was going to be a problem, because we could continue talking about this for the next. I've got questions now going around in my brain, but we're going to have to move it on.
The point being, that is a really absorbing book, and I thoroughly recommend it. And if you're anyway interested in rights, read that book. So that's that one. Yeah. Okay. So I've got more. More.
Have you got a fiction one that's not a stretch your mind one?
Well, that's what I said. So that's my pass list. So let me see where. Oh my gosh, where is Anita gone? Yeah. So I'm putting this up as an example of what I'm calling spinster lit, right? So this is Anita Bruckner and Hotel de Lac, okay? And I listened to this amazing podcast. You know, David McRedmond, who's the chief executive of On Post, used to work in the publishing industry in the UK, and he worked with this two guys, John Mitchinson and Andy Miller, and they have a podcast called Backlisted, and it's about giving new life to old books. And they do kind of 1 hour long episodes where they talk about whatever they're reading that week, and then they talk about an old book, and they bring in two guests. And this podcast has been my joy of lockdown. I started listening to it in the spring. David had recommended it. And it has got me reading books that I never, ever would have read. Either books that I thought were way too complicated for me. But you listen to it and they give you a door into it. And then I can go and read it and then come back and listen to the episode again. So they did an episode on Barbara Pym, who was one of these 1950s writers who wrote very kind of apparently light novels, usually about spinsters. They did another one on
then they'd have to be light.
Yeah.
Well, like women who write about women, it's always light.
Well, this I'm going to contrast it with Anita Bruckner. And then they did Muriel Spark, and you probably know her, the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. So I got out all their books from the library, and I'm so sad at the moment that the libraries are closed. I'm going to have to wait. A personal campaign with Tony, please let us do click and collect from the library, because I can't tell you that my Barbara Pyms or Muriel Sparks, they're all gone back. And then Anita is probably a more literary version of what they do, where it's all about internal lives of women, and a lot of them are unmarried. So hers is weightier in ways, but they're all similar in that it's all about the internal lives of women with small lives. And I think any woman reading it, having those moments where you're standing at the kitchen sink, washing the carrots, wondering, well, did he ever really love me at all? You know, they all have, those moments in it, and the rich internal lives of women
Yeah.
and unhappy, ordinary women.
Oh, lovely.
And
That's right up my alley now.
yeah, and they're really, really good. Now, Bruckner, I listened to my very first audiobook since I couldn't get any more books out of the library, and I listened to one of hers, A Closed Eye, and it was being read by Prunella Scales. Remember
Oh,
Prunella Scales?
brilliant.
Now,
Yeah.
the book started to bug me after a while, but Prunella Scales' diction
She's
was so
wonderful.
wonderful. And
Yeah.
she wouldn't say luxurious, she goes luxurious,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I
your
love.
diction will be, and your accent will be automatically improved and uplifted by listening to the audiobook. So they were really enjoyable, and they're 2 sitting jobs. Then you
Excellent.
gave me Rodham, so we should mention Rodham. Have you mentioned Rodham on your
No, I
thing?
haven't. I haven't mentioned that before. I just thought that was a hoot. I absolutely thought it was a hoot.
And you sent me this in the post, which was so nice. And on the day that's in it, I thought it particularly relevant to mention it.
True.
So this is about what if Hillary didn't marry Bill? So it goes a pretty accurate account of their relationship when they first met. And then at a crucial moment, she decides to walk away and what becomes of both of them. So it's not spoiling too much to say that she does end up running for president. We won't say what happens. And that was a super read. And that was a 2 sitting
It's
job.
just it's such a and it's the kind
Yeah.
of book that you're reading it, and because there's so much of it is true, is what happened, and so much of it describes her as we kind of know her, that I found I kept having to say to myself, this is a novel. This isn't what happened. This is a novel. But it was a great it was a very clever imagining of a different outcome to the Bill and Hill thing. Actually, just going back for a moment, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but going back to a moment to your religion and your Christianity and all the rest of it, one of my favorite books this year was written by an American writer called Sue Monk Kidd, who wrote The Secret Life of Bees that was made into a movie a number
Oh,
of
yeah,
years
yeah,
ago.
yeah.
She wrote a book last year called The Book of Longing, and again, obviously it's a novel, it's a work of fiction, but it is the story of Anna, the wife of Jesus. And so it's again, it's beautiful, and I think you'd like it. It's really interesting, it's really evocative, and again, for the current climate, it takes you completely away to the Holy Land at the time of Jesus, and it is a very much a female story. Jesus is only a shadowy kind of a by the way to it, but it's very much about her and her life and her frustrations at what she wants to achieve in her life as well. But it's a definite recommended one. And then I always recommend one of my books, and what I'm reading at the moment, and I'm a good kind of
Yeah.
2/3 of the way into it. This is a book called The Tainted by, I hope I'm
Mhm.
not mangling her name, Covery Madhaven, who I follow on Twitter. She's an Irish Indian woman. And again, it's set in India in the early part in the 1920s. It starts off there. So there's, kind of India under the Raj and an Irish regiment. And in the background is all what's going on here, and how that affects the stories of what's happening in India. It's again beautifully evocative, and India is a place that I'd love to go to. And it is it's a really interesting good read.
I'm
Okay,
I'm 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 afraid to go to India because I'm not sure I would be able to cope with the poverty. It's one of the things that's always frightened me about India.
yeah, I would agree. I would find that, yeah, probably challenging. But anything I've read or I've watched about India, it's just, I love Indian colors. I love the way Indian women dress. I
Mm.
love Indian food. I love the whole kind of, I'd say it would be such an assault on your senses and such a
Mm.
cultural kind of a smack in the jaw. I think I could, yeah, no, I would very much like to sample India very much. Come here. Um,
Yeah.
Talk to me about radio, because you have very weird taste in listening
Oh
to
yeah.
radio, uh, for somebody who used to present radio and presented one of the best programs that was on radio. Tell me about your addiction.
Okay, so I listen to BBC Radio 4 and BBC Radio 4 Extra a lot, okay? And now, fine, woman's hour, I'm kind of so over at this stage, and my own correspondent can be very earnest and a bit much. but they do the most wonderful drama. So they do a lot of abridged versions of books and great drama. And actually one that's currently being played on BBC4 Radio Extra, it's on Monday, Tuesday, and the last episode, I think was today, I have it to listen back to, was a dramatization of Sean le Carey, A Perfect Spy. They're replaying it because obviously he died so recently. And it's just brilliant. And audio is wonderful in that you can go off and do your exercise and go for your walk or your cycle or clean the kitchen or whatever. So you know, to listen to those plays and everything is brilliant. But I know that you're referring to The Archers.
I'm referring to The Archers.
Yes. So this, for those who don't know, they probably vaguely know the name. It's 70th anniversary this year. The Archers was conceived of as a radio drama, kind of a Harbour Hotel type thing, after World War II. And its main purpose was to be able to convey to the farmers of England, through the medium of drama, better agricultural and farming practices. Okay?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the idea was that they'd have all these characters in the village and, you know, they'd be slipping into the conversation the whole time. Oh, I'm trying out this new fertilizer, and have you tried the new system of ploughing? But they'd put in the drama. And it was all very home counties for a while. And then at one point they brought in the Grundys to add a bit of working class colour to the whole thing. So friends of mine had grown up, their mother loved this, and they got me into it. And it absolutely is addictive, and people think I'm crack. But what they do is they have these amazing stories, but nobody gives them a chance because they think, oh, that's just The Archers. So there was a storyline about 3 or 4 years ago that you would have loved. They brought in the editor of EastEnders to manage it. And it was a character called Helen who met this amazing guy called Rob, and they fall in love and they get married. And then very, very slowly and very, very sneakily, Rob starts to take over her life, starts taking control of the money, starts just making it that bit difficult for her friends to call around, starts creating trouble. And until the end, she is absolutely broken. And it's coercive control. So he never hits her. He never thumps her, but he gradually
controls every.
And the story was built up very carefully over about a year until finally we know that she's going to leave him. She's had enough. And of course, the most dangerous moment when any woman goes to leave an abusive husband, that's the point where someone's going to get hurt. So there was a famous night where she's making him this dinner and then she's going to tell him that she's leaving. And she made him a tuna bake, and then there was some custard, and he made this cutting remark about how it was only the packet custard. And that's kind of a bit lazy. Would you not make the custard from the start? And we're all screaming at the radio, stab the bastard. So there's a scuffle. She does end up stabbing him. And then, so she's arrested for attempted murder. She's in jail and there's a trial. And they did this episode where it was the jury. It was an hour-long episode. They'd Nigel Havers, Catherine Tate, Dame Eileen Atkins.
Wow. Okay.
And you always sit with the grabbing the radio as this was done. And there was a big tweet along with it. And people were doing solidarity with Helen. And you did a photograph of yourself with your cup of tea. And then one man began a campaign to have a Helen fund for Women's Aid. And people started to donate money to Women's Aid. And they would put on the donation page the reason why. And I was in tears. It was people giving €50 for my mother who never got out, or from my grandmother who escaped, and they put in their stories. It would absolutely break your heart. So thank God Helen gets off. You know, so other storylines they've had are, there's a gay couple, Adam and Ian. They've had a surrogate child. Alice is pregnant at the moment, and she's been a sneaky secret alcoholic for ages, and she's trying to detox now because she's preggers. Kirsty's husband Philip has turned out to be using slave labor in his building trade, and he always knew it was going to end badly because Kirsty always has a bad love life. And so there's all these major dramatic stories, and in fact there was so little agriculture in it that Dead Ringers, the BBC comedy show, once did a scene where this guy crashes into the BBC canteen and he takes someone hostage, and he's the agricultural editor of The Archers, and he wants agriculture stories back in the spotlight because no one's interested in the no-till method anymore. So it's a So I think you're
Listen,
also listening to the Archers. It's
you've
fantastic.
you've sold that really well. So if anybody wants to catch up on the Archers now to kind of start getting involved, when and where is that on?
So it's on every night at 7. Then they repeat it at 10 to 2. Or is it the other way around? No, yeah, it's on at 7. They repeat it at 10 to 2 the next day. But you can listen back to all the episodes on the
Online.
BBC Radio 4 website. And they do the whole Helen ones. They're all there and all the big clips. So you can go back and listen to those if you want. And
Okay.
yeah, and actually, I think coincidentally, at the time that the trial was going on, a bill on coercive control was just going through the House of Commons, and coercive
Right. So it
control
was
is now a crime. So it
right.
was really very current. Yeah. So
Very good.
there you go.
I cannot let you go without
Yeah.
asking you, and I hope you're going to give me the right answer to this because I will be terribly disappointed if you don't.
Oh,
Have you
God.
been watching? Have you been watching Bridgerton?
Yes. So now
Yeah,
I've watched hardly any TV the whole
yeah.
pandemic, and
I know you
I think
don't watch a lot of TV.
yeah, and but like, these books are all very complicated sometimes, and you do need something to escape from, even if you've got the Archers. So somebody said watch Bridgerton. Oh my God. I think I watched it not in quite one sitting, but definitely two. And yeah, Jane Austen with hot sex. I mean, Hastings, one of the most beautiful men I think I've ever
Isn't
seen on
he
television.
just? Isn't he just? I mean,
Oh,
honestly, he is just one of the most divine creatures I have ever seen in my entire life.
yes, so I was reading all these very worthy reviews about it in The Guardian, and their use of Black people, which is amazing the way they just work that
Yeah,
in. It's not just another white aristocratic,
yeah,
a
yeah.
drama, but like not and there were the importance of women and how hard it was for them in the marriage market, and giving all these very good political reasons why you should be watching Bridgerton. And it was stop. It's just about the sex. It's
And it's
only
mental. I mean, it is mental, and nothing really that much happens. And this, the sets are all over. The whole thing is like a big sugary cake, but in the middle of
yeah,
it, then you have this most delicious looking man. And as I
yeah,
say, lots of hot sex. So I'm very
yeah.
glad you were watching it.
Yeah, and of course it's so easily satirized as well. I can't wait till the guys get going with it on the telly because Hastings, who's this beautiful man who has made a vow to come into his handkerchief for the rest of his life because he doesn't want to have a child. Like it's ridiculous. But
It
sure,
is. It's totally mad. But you know what? It's perfect viewing again for these mad times that we're living in because it is complete and utter escapism. Like it completely takes you out with fabulous scenery. So like, what's not
yeah,
to like? Actually, there's another
yeah,
one on Netflix that I don't know if you I know you don't watch that much television, but again, I don't know if anybody who's watching us has watched it called Back to Life,
no.
which is a series on Netflix. It's the first series, and it stars a woman called Daisy Haggard, who I knew was familiar looking to me, and she also co-wrote it. And she was in again a Sky series that was very good last year called Breeders, but it's kind of a dark comedy, very strange, slightly disturbing, laugh out loud funny in places, but kind of very weird. But yeah, I'd recommend it. It's odd, but
So
it's
what's it called
interesting.
again? Secret of
It's
Life, did you
called
say?
Back to Life. And it's
Back
about a
to Life.
woman who's been in prison for, well, you don't know what for, so I won't tell you initially. And she's come out of prison and she's kind of back living with her parents. And she's a bit weird, but yeah, the whole story is it's dark and it's odd, but it's definitely worth a watch. Listen, we've gone over time, as I knew we would, as I
Okay.
knew we would. But I just want to thank you so much. That was a great discussion about religion, great book suggestions. I'm going to get all your book suggestions from you so I can put them up on my website along with this tomorrow so that people can dip in there because I think people are always hungry for different things to read rather than just what's on the bestsellers list or what's in the local bookshop.
Great.
Having to fertile for something
I've
different.
about 20 more that I didn't get to mention, so I'll send them all into you and why they're
You and
great. So
Terry Prone, loads of books. Listen, Sarah, go back to the inauguration. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I really appreciate it. It's great to see you. And I hope I'll see you in real life.
Yeah.
in the not
Yeah.
too distant
Soon.
future.
Okay. Take care, Barbara. Thanks for having me on
Thank
for the
you.
chat. Bye.
Thanks a million. And thanks everybody for joining us. Once again, as I say, this episode will be up on my website from tomorrow, which is barbarascully.com. If you want to share it there and watch it back with anybody at that stage. But for now, I will be here again next week with another guest to work out how to stay sane in a pandemic. And we're out.